Okay, so we have 4 types of questions: the essay question, the true, false, and the fill in the blanks, multiple choice. And here we are rendering just 2 of them. One is a fill in the blanks and an essay type of question. And we can render different content for different types. We have dedicated components for this. But we need to be able to pass the question object that it lives in the quiz taker component. We need to pass down the question, right? As we iterate over them, we need to pass them to each one of them so that we can bind data, right? For instance, let's pass in the question down to, for instance, the essay question. So let's do that. How do we do that? Let's go back to the taker, the quiz taker. And the quiz taker is the one that's iterating over the questions. You see that? Here we are iterating over all the question in the quiz questions. And we need to be able to pass the question object to each one of these components down. Right? We'd like to be able to do something like question is equal to question, right? Like to pass the object down to each one of these. So how do we do that? Well, to do that, we need to declare in each one of these attributes, in each one of these components, we need to declare input fields, right? We declare that, hey, there's these attributes that they're going to be used. I want you to bind them from an attribute that is going to be passed on to me. I want you to bind it into a local variable. All right? So let's do that. So for instance, in each one of these, we're going to want to declare a question object. A question object. And somebody's going to pass that question to me. Right? So to do that, to be able to declare that this is going to be bound to an attribute as an input field to me, right? We annotate it as follows. We say that this is an input. It's an input, like that. Right? Meaning this is not something that I am generating. Right? This is not something that I'm fetching in some database or whatever. Instead, it's something that has already been set. It already has a reference, right? And somebody is passing it to me. It's an input to me, right? And it's a reference, right? Whatever I do to this object, it'll be the same object that was passed to me by reference. Right? And I like to do that for all these, right? So if the fill in the blank, same thing. Same thing for the multiple choice. And same thing for the essay. They're all going to take as argument, right, a question object as an attribute. Now that we have that, we can now go back to each one of these components and pass the question along. Question. Notice that it's already identified question as a variable in the component that is bindable, right? It's an object. It's a variable inside of the component that we can bind to, right? Notice that it's already offering to put brackets around it. See that? It says you want to be able to bind to that object that variable that you just declared called questions, and it's asking me what do you want to bind it to. And we're going to bind it to the variable that is being declared outside, right? This one, question. So we're going to say question right here. Notice that it identifies questions already as this local variable, right? And it's being bound to the attribute, the property inside of the component. Right? So let's do that for all these. Let's bind it, and bind it. Okay, now all the components have the attributes. Let's make this a little easier to read. There we go. That's one of the components. Okay. Please use good practice. Make good use of white spaces so that folk can much easier be able to read this. There we go. So we have 4 components, and each one will be rendered differently. Everybody okay? All right. So to test whether this is actually working, what we're going to do is that that object has a title, the description. I know we're already rendering outside of the component, right? But just to test, right, just to make sure that this is working, I'm going to render it inside the HTML of the component. See if I can render this title, right, and this description. Now, let's do that. Right? So what we'll do is that in the component, let's see, this is an essay question. So let's go into the essay. Let's go in there. Let's go in the HTML. Right now, it's just rendering the text area, right? And that works, right? The text area is being rendered. But I'd like to know if that question is now available to me inside of the component, right? Which is presumably bound to the variable that we're iterating over, okay? So I should be able to say title here, right? And do an H5 maybe. And indeed I am. Indeed I do have access to that. I do have access to the data that is being passed to me as a reference. Everybody good? Okay. Excellent. Very good. All right. So how would we submit this? Say that I do provide a text that I fill in for my essay, and I want to submit it. I want to submit it to the for posting to the server as an answer. Right? Well, I would need to bind this text area as an answer to that question. So that question, right, has a description, has the title, has a points, how much value. Well, I like to be also say, hey, for that particular question, this is my answer. Right? In this particular case, it would be an essay answer. Right? It would be the answer for an essay. And I think we already discussed the data model for that, right? It would be that for a particular submission, there will be answers for true, false, which is Boolean. For essay, it will be a string and whatnot. And they will all be part of the answer, right? So how do we grab those answers from within? Right? So let's take a look at that next.